In this series of Healthy Ireland at Your Library videos, viewers are encouraged to develop a positive approach to caring for your mental health. Created by and courtesy of the HSE, all content is based on evidence and research around the areas of wellbeing and positive psychology. Over 8 episodes, we'll provide hints, tips and guidance on how to care for your mental health every day. We're all aware of increasing levels of anxiety and depression. This series gives us the tips to flourish and thrive. It encourages us to discover and appreciate our strengths so we can use them to enjoy life and to look forward to the future. Self-care has moved on from a therapy buzzword and increasingly become a staple in our thinking around mental health well-being. But what is self-care? Why is it important? And how do we prioritise ourselves and make sure that we build it into our everyday? Theresa McElhinney of the HSE answers all of these questions and outlines some of the ways we can build our own self-care toolkit.
Let's look at a formal definition of self-care so that we know what we're talking about. That would be the activities and practices that we deliberately choose to do every day to support our health and well-being. And notice in the definition the word deliberately, because if we don't deliberately plan it and choose to do it, then it often doesn't happen. So really what self-care means about prioritising taking care of ourselves every day in different ways. And there's various activities that we can do that help our self-care. So why is self-care important? Well, for a start, it improves our overall health and well-being. And it also helps us feel better about ourselves. It improves our self-esteem, because if we feel good, then we'll feel better about ourselves. And one of the benefits of good self-care is that we're more likely then to be able to relax and sleep better as well, because we're caring for ourselves during the day. It also helps us to cope with life's challenges, because the better our self-care, the more resilient we are. So we can cope with the challenges that we're facing every day. So there are many benefits to good self-care. What are good self-care habits? There are many of them, and we know that people who have good mental health practice a lot of these habits every day. The first one is really about what we eat, so eating healthily is key to our good self-care. So that will be looking at our diet, our consumption of fruit and vegetables every day, the amount of processed food we're eating. So what we're aiming for is a healthy balance in our diet every day. When it comes to self-care, we do need to look at our consumption of alcohol and tobacco as well, because these sometimes are what we call short-term coping mechanisms, but really in the long term do not benefit our health. A real boost to our self-care is getting out and getting active. So any kind of movement that makes you physically active every day benefits your mental health and well-being. That could be walking outside outdoors, it could be gardening, it could be running a marathon if that's what you want to do. Something that's really important when it comes to our self-care is about how we treat ourselves, about being kind to ourselves when we make mistakes or mess up, and just understanding that we don't have to be perfect. There is a lot of evidence about the benefit of good relationships, so connecting with others and building positive relationships has a wonderful impact on our mental health and well-being. A lot of us have given up our hobbies as we've become adults, so it's important to hold on to those interests and hobbies because they give us time out from the routine of day-to-day life. So if you've forgotten what you used to be interested in, maybe you could rediscover one of your old hobbies, because being interested and being engaged in something is hugely important. And equally, just being interested in our work and how we spend our time is important for our self-care. And stress is another thing that we do need to manage. And a lot of us experience stress in different ways and cope with it in different ways. But if stress is challenging for you, working out ways to mind it and to notice when you are getting stressed is very important to your mental health. Asking for help and being able to do that when you need it is key to self-care, because you can't do everything alone, and sometimes it may be the support of family and friends, or sometimes it may be professional help. It may just be asking someone to give you a hand and knowing when you are becoming overwhelmed. So if help is there, do use it. If someone offers to do you a favour, accept it and be grateful. Getting good sleep is important to your self-care. Knowing how to relax, how to wind down in the evening time is key. Because doing without sleep is probably one of the most challenging things that we have to do. So it's really important to have a regular routine, getting up at the same time, going to bed at the same time. So remember in childhood when you had a bedtime routine, still equally important to have that as an adult as well, to get ready to go to sleep, which means you'll sleep better. So what gets in the way? There's probably a lot of things that you feel that do. I don't have the time. So you don't have time for self-care. And that's often when we need self-care most, when we feel we don't have the time. Or perhaps you'll do it when you get your holidays. So we're kind of kicking it down the road a bit. When you get a minute, you look after yourself. And if you're a bit of a procrastinator like me, then you never actually get round to doing that, to looking after yourself. And then the holiday comes and you're exhausted. What about I'd feel guilty taking time for myself? That's a very common one, particularly if you have children to care for. For those of you who might have been on a plane, remember the safety announcements you might have heard about the oxygen masks. To put on your own oxygen mask first before you go and tend to someone else. And the same is there for self-care. We need to look after ourselves first and not feel guilty about it. And then we're better able to look after other people. What about I can't say no, or I'm not good at saying no? And what happens then? Then you have all of these things piling up that you've said yes to, that you don't have time to do. But somehow or other you've ended up saying yes to them. So no is an answer as well. And sometimes we need to learn and practice it. Just to say no out loud, see what it feels like. What about I'll do it when I finish this? So you have a list of tasks that have to be done first. And I think one thing we can remember about self-care is if we don't put it in our diary, if we don't plan it and prioritise it, then it won't happen because there'll always be something to finish first. So lots of excuses there. Maybe some genuine reasons, but have a look and see if there's any of those that you can change. How do we make time for self-care when we're so busy? One thing that's very useful, and I mentioned it earlier on, is about having a routine and a schedule and not piling up things to do all in the one day, to try and spread it out maybe over the week or over a couple of days so that you don't feel overwhelmed with having too much to do in one day. How are you about lists? Sometimes lists can be an added pressure, but I find a short list just with the 3 important things that you want to achieve that day can mean you get it done. Whereas if you have a big long list, it can actually put you off and you end up doing nothing because you become overwhelmed. So perhaps maybe number 1, 2 and 3 that you hope to get done that day. And at the end of the day, if you do get them done, to give yourself a pat on the back and say, well done, I did that. Because often we don't acknowledge the things that we get done, how hard we work. So praise yourself. So try not to put things off. This is procrastination again, really, isn't it? But the author Mark Twain would say, if it's your job to eat a frog, eat it first thing in the morning. And if it's your job to eat 2 frogs, eat the biggest one first. So what that really means is if there's something that you really don't want to do, to try and get it out of the way as soon as you can, so that you're not thinking about it all day. And sometimes we don't have a lot of time. So really we do have to try and make time for self-care. It's not always easy, and it does take a bit of effort. It takes a bit of planning. But once you start to notice the benefits, you will realise it's worth it. And to remember it's not selfish and not to feel guilty, because good mental health starts with looking after yourself. Have you a sense of how you know when you're actually getting stressed? For some people it could be a headache, it could be aches and pains, or they could just get irritated with people. You could eat the head of somebody over some minor thing because your stress is rising and you're not aware of it. And that can be a sign that you haven't been minding yourself, that your self-care has slipped. Perhaps maybe you intended to go out for a walk every evening and you haven't done that for a while, or that you haven't managed to eat as healthily as you hoped and you're just snacking and not getting proper nutrition. So all of that can actually affect our overall well-being. And if we have good self-care, the chances of that happening are less. So as you can see, stress and self-care are connected. So in order to manage our stress and improve our self-care, we need to look at how we can build our own self-care toolkit. What is a self-care toolkit? Well, these are all the healthy practices and habits that we do for ourselves every day. I mentioned them earlier on, that benefit our overall health and well-being. There may be some in there already that you're very happy with, and there may be areas then that you want to improve on. If you're someone who doesn't take a lot of physical activity, that might be something that you want to increase during the week. It's recommended that we have 30 minutes a day of moderate physical activity. How are you doing on that? Maybe that's an area that you want to look at. What about your caffeine and sugar and alcohol consumption? Maybe there are things that you want to reduce, and that can go in as a good habit into your self-care toolkit. Looking again at sleep. How's your sleep? Are you getting a good night's rest? And that is something that can improve the quality of our life a huge amount. So it's important to have that in our toolkit if it's not there already. So you'll know yourself the areas that you need to focus on and that you'll benefit most from. So once you've decided the areas that you want to focus on, then it's about making a commitment to yourself. Because as I said earlier on, if we don't plan it, then it doesn't get done. So it is about committing to actually doing what it is you want to do for your mental health and well-being. For now, just focus in on one area that you want to add to your toolkit, one habit that perhaps you want to change. So start now and continue on. And when you've done that, to pat yourself on the back and acknowledge yourself for making that change and say, well done. Because your self-care is worth it, and so are you.